Thank you for joining me today for the latest edition of Chandler Focus. I'm Matt Orlando, the Vice Mayor of Chandler. For decades, Chandler has quietly been leading the way in developing smart water management and strategies in order to preserve this precious commodity. Um, but today, we're no longer being quiet about it. I'm going to introduce you to two guests, city's top water experts, to explore Chandler's water on what we're doing to not only conserve and make sure water is clean when it gets to your tap, but also what we're doing in the future about our precious commodity. Let's start with our first guest today, Simone Jolsrud, who is our water resource manager. Simone, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Joel, as I said, we've been quietly since probably the mid 80s developing a strategic plan. And we'll touch a little bit on that in this first part, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on the other waste side of the water. But right now, all right, the question on everyone's mind is we have a drought, tier one, tier two, tier three. What does all that mean, A? And then B, what's happening with the drought?
Sure. Well, it's there's a lot to keep track of. There's a lot going on right now in the world of water resources. One of the things that you mentioned is that right now we're in a tier two shortage on the Colorado River. So the first ever shortage was declared last year in 2022, and we were in a tier one shortage. In 2023, we moved into a tier two shortage. And what that means is based on the agreement amongst the 7 states that share the Colorado River, there has been certain elevations in Lake Powell and Lake Mead are the two primary reservoirs on the Colorado River system. So when those reservoirs reach certain elevations, showing that they're declining to concerning levels, the states have all agreed that certain reductions in demand will be taken at different elevations within the lake. So as the elevation goes down, the tier shortage increases. And so because we went below elevation 1050 at Lake Mead for 2023, it meant we were in a tier two shortage this year.
And then tier three, obviously, which we hope we never get there, but tier three means what? Now, even lesser of allocation or cuts potentially, right?
Correct. So if Lake Mead were to continue to decline and go below elevation 1025, that would trigger a tier three shortage. And that would mean that we would take additional reductions in Arizona to our Colorado River allocation.
So one of the questions that I know a lot of folks have asked me is, okay, so and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, then we'll go back a little bit because it's important to get the overall picture. We get water from Colorado River, and we get water from the SRP distribution center, correct?
Correct. Chandler has a few different sources of surface water supplies, and that's really important. It's one of the things that makes us so resilient in our water supplies is that we have the ability to adjust our water resources plan depending on the availability of different surface water supplies. So Chandler gets water from the Colorado River. As you mentioned, we also get water from the SRP system, which is the Salt and Verde watershed. So that's all within Arizona. And then we also use a little bit of groundwater, and then we have a very robust reclaimed water system, which is not used for drinking water supplies, but we do have 375-ish customers for reclaimed water. And what that does is by serving reclaimed water for things like irrigation uses or industrial purposes, it takes pressure off of our drinking water supplies. It allows us to use our drinking water supplies where they're needed most and use reclaimed water in other areas where that's a sufficient use of that water.
So now let's go to the other side of the equation. We talked about the cap. We know we share that with 7 other states or 6 other entities, including Mexico, I believe, right?
Yes, 7 states and 2 countries. Good
So
point.
yeah, so we have to factor that into the allocation system, even though Mexico's the lower end of the geographical area, they still have their share of it, and as well as the Native American tribes have a share in that whole conflict.
Correct.
So it's very, very complex system. I'm
Yes.
glad we have you on board to figure all this out because it really is complex. So we have the Colorado, we have the SRP. How is that system doing? The SRP and the Roosevelt and some of the other dams that we hear
Right.
about.
There's 6 different reservoirs in the Salt and Verde system. And the reservoirs in the Salton Verde system are essentially 100% full right now.
Wow.
So that's really excellent news. It's a historic year on the Salton Verde watershed. There was actually so much snow melt and so much water coming into those reservoirs over the past couple months that you might have noticed as you're driving across the freeway that
Yeah.
there's actually water flowing down what's normally a dry salt riverbed, right? So there's been so much water in that system this year that they actually don't have enough reservoir capacity to hold all of the water. So that tells you what a great year it's been on that watershed.
Okay. All right, so we got the Colorado River, we got the watershed, we have our groundwater, which is a good trifecta. I don't want to put any more words in your mouth, so that's great news. So the two of those areas we're doing well or better. What's the percentage again of CAP versus SRP and groundwater?
Yes, it changes a little bit from year to year, and it just kind of depends on what's happening within each of the watersheds. So, in a year when the Salton Verde system is doing really, really well, we're going to try to really maximize those resources. In a year when the Colorado River system isn't doing as well, we're trying to kind of always balance that strategically. But on average, roughly 57% of our annual supplies come from the Salton Verde system. 37% of our annual supplies come from the Colorado River, and then somewhere in the range of 6% of our supplies come from groundwater pumping.
So the other thing we've done well, and like Veteran Oasis Park is really a what do you call
A
a
recharge
recharge
facility.
facility, which means what now?
So Chandler has been really at the forefront of planning ahead for making sure that we're putting a focus on sustainable aquifer management. It's really, really important to be thinking about the long term. So we want to protect our aquifer. We try to reserve groundwater pumping for only when needed, certain times of the year to meet peak demand. Sometimes we use groundwater if we're doing maintenance at a treatment plant and that treatment plant is unavailable for a certain period of time. But we look at groundwater as just a sort of a supply that's only used when we really need to use it. We like to it's a savings account, right? We
Right.
think of our surface water supplies as the checking account and groundwater supplies as the savings account. And we try not to use it as much as possible because it's a finite resource, right? Surface water supplies, it's a renewable resource. It comes every year. Groundwater is finite. So when we pump groundwater, one of the things that the state requires, it's part of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, is that we have to replenish our groundwater pumping. So the state has done a very wise thing in saying groundwater is finite. We need to protect it. If you pump groundwater, you must replenish the water you pump. And so by having recharge facilities located in Chandler, it means that we're able to replenish our groundwater pumping in the same place where we're pumping it. And so that helps to keep the local aquifer healthy,
Right.
right?
That makes
You don't
sense.
want to pump water here and then put water back into the ground somewhere 50 miles away, because then there's kind of a disconnection between where you're pumping it and where you're putting it back in. So recharge facilities allow us to make sure that we're maintaining that really healthy balance between what we're taking out of the aquifer and what we're putting back into the aquifer.
Yeah, that's great news too. And the other thing I want to talk a little bit about is, well, just make a comment here. The other thing we've done, I think, with smart government as well, is for every piece of land that we have left to develop in Chandler, we actually put a number of gallons per usage of day or some aspect of that in order to give us better water management. You want to talk a little about that? Is there details or?
Sure. So one of the things that's unique about Arizona, and specifically unique in the Phoenix, what's called an active management area. The state has designated the Phoenix metro area as an active management area for the purposes of looking at how supply and demand is maintained. And what they've done is they say, if you want to develop, it's called the Assured Water Supply Program. If you want to have any development within your city, you need to prove you have the water to support that development, not just to meet your current demands, but to meet all of your future projected demands.
I
So
mean,
this
that's what we talk about, the 100 years or whatever.
100-year
Yeah,
assured
right,
water supply.
right.
So we're always, when we're planning for water resources, we're planning for 100 years, not just our current demands, but all of the future demands that we expect to have within the next 100 years for any piece of land that develops in Chandler. So in order to plan properly for water resources, we're always looking at, even if that piece of land isn't developed today, what are the different land uses that our planning department is
Right.
expecting, and how much water do those types of land uses usually need. And so we have a very extensive planning process through the master plan and the utility master plan, through the general plan and the utility master plan, that helps us to plan for the water resources needed for every single parcel of land.
And I think that's, again, another great innovative way of looking at how we really literally do our land use. Is not just land use, what go on there, but how much water will then be taken over the next 100 years in this case.
Right.
And then we have partnerships, obviously, with Intel, is one of our largest water users. We've got aquifer systems with them. We've had a piping system with them. And they've gone a great long way as far as trying to reuse their water, obviously, because this saves them money in the long term, too. So we've been working with them for years as well.
Yeah, Intel has been an extremely responsible partner. They have a very detailed plan for kind of getting to net zero water
Right.
use, where they're trying to make sure that they're not, that every bit of water they use is sort of being put back, so to speak. So we've had a very, very successful partnership between the city of Chandler, and Intel recycles all of the water that it uses. So every drop of water that they use gets recycled and reused kind of infinitely forever.
I appreciate it. Okay, so big picture, several sources of water. We've got recharge. We've had a land management usage. And we want to go back now to the snowfall. We talked a little bit about that earlier in Arizona. How about the rest of the Colorado River? There's some good news on that, at least short-term good news.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier that it's been a historic year on the Salton Verde watershed, which is within Arizona. It's also been a historic year on the Colorado River system. So the Colorado River Basin spans across, as you mentioned, 7 states and 2 countries. We share the Colorado River with Mexico as well. And the last time I checked, the expectation is that the runoff season, which is usually April through July, right? We start to see
We're starting
the
now.
snow falls in the winter, and then starting about now through the summer is when we start to see that snow melt, and it runs off into the river, and then eventually ends up in those 2 major reservoirs I talked about, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Right now, we're hoping that we're going to see about 177% of average. So that means
Wow.
a lot more than an average year in terms of
That's
the amount of
170%
water.
above an average year.
177%
above an average year.
of average. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's looking like it will be a very strong year for the amount of snow that's going to melt and run off into the reservoirs for the Colorado River.
Now, the caveat is that short term, we need probably about 3 or 4 years of sustainable, that type of above average wall to get us.
Yes, it's really great news that we're having a good year on the Colorado River, but we also want to just keep in mind that we've had 25 years of historic low water levels in the reservoirs. And so one good year is unfortunately not enough to erase 25 bad years. So if we could get another 5 years like this year, that would be great. We're hoping for 5 more
or
of
10
this.
or something.
Or 10
like
or 20, right,
I
yes.
got you. Yeah, we're good. So let me, now that our residents are getting a good feel for where we're at, just some good news, some bad news, and some stuff that we've done long-term and for short-term gain. So what we've done back then is helping us today to be able to mitigate potential issues down there. Let's talk about the conservation program, because I know you are instrumental in that as well. We have conservation programs today. What are we looking at? Can you describe some of the quick conservation programs today, and then maybe some of the ones we're thinking of the future?
Yes. So City of Chandler has a great team of people that are working on water conservation and working with the community to make sure that it's a priority and it's a focus to save as much water as possible, use water as efficiently as possible. And we have some really excellent history to look back on in terms of demonstrated success in those programs. So one thing I'll say is that we have a great website that's chandleraz.gov/save water. And that website has all sorts of information about all of our different programs, the amount of water that each of the different programs has helped to save on an average year. But just to give you an example, across all of our conservation programs, we see roughly 100 million gallons of water is saved each year just from the programs that happened in that year.
Wow.
And if all of those water savings programs continue on and people continue to to implement those programs for 5 years, it's 550 million gallons that are saved just from the programs of that 1 year. So you can see how when that starts to stack up over time, all of that water saved really starts to add up.
Yeah.
So when we look at the kind of long-term average right now, we see that the average Chandler household is using about 20% less water today than they did 25 years ago.
Wow.
So it's been a very successful program.
So I know, and so the website, and I know you just put out a brand new guide about how much water to put on your lawn, and you did a really extensive area. If you got this type of a sprinkler system, use this much time, and I think the goal is water twice a week, right? Something like that.
No more than twice a week.
That's what it was,
We
yeah.
really want to encourage everybody when yes, we're having a good year this year, but we also know that that doesn't solve the long-term challenges. And so it's really important for everyone to keep a focus on water conservation. If there's one simple thing that everybody can do is make sure that if you're watering grass, you're not watering more than twice a week. So
Yeah.
twice a week in the summer, once a week in the winter. Your grass really doesn't need more than once a week in the winter.
Yeah, I take that guide seriously. Thank you very much. In fact, I replaced some of my heads already because didn't match up to what you were doing.
We do have some more information
Yeah.
about like how long to water
Yeah.
for different types of
Yeah.
rotors and that sort of thing.
Our time is up. I'm so sorry. We
goodness,
have to
okay.
transition to not from your area to how water gets from the treatment plant to the tap.
Okay.
Another interesting subject. I love it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for all the information and giving us a quick overview of what's going on in Chandler.
You bet.
So thank you, Simone. So now I believe we're going to talk, we talked a little bit about conservation programs now, but we also have a few videos that we're going to share with our viewers so that reinforce some of the things that you talked about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dina Burns with City of Chandler Water Conservation Office, and I'm here today with Drew Rostain. He is also from City of Chandler Water Conservation Office, and we're going to be talking about our classes and highlighting some of the information that you'll learn by attending our classes. So we're gonna go look for some plants today.
Yeah, let's go grab look at some plants. I'll grab a cart and we'll get started. What about these peripenstemon?
No, I think those would be great, especially because we're going to be planting in a pot, and we know that these get about 1.5 inches tall and 1.5 inches wide, so they should give us the perfect layout for what we're looking to do.
And they also attract hummingbirds, and who doesn't like hummingbirds?
One of the big things that we like to teach in our class is to get that eye movement, and by creating different elevations helps with that. So we're trying to look for a ground cover that's going to be lower, still giving us some flowers, but it's going to be lower so that you have that movement. So I don't know about you, Drew, but I'm thinking that maybe the chocolate flower might work. We know it's a low water using plant. And side benefits, smell that. They're
Smells like
called chocolate flower for a reason.
The maturity of these plants, they're gonna grow bigger, so I think this is a good start. And if, worst comes to worst, we have to come back, we can get more.
So let's go ahead and head out and get these in the ground. Okay, so as you can see, we have arrived back at our planting location. We've actually kind of laid the plants out, and always keeping in mind where the plants are gonna be at full growth. When we pull these out, you just kind of give them a roll. They will slide out pretty easily. You do want to make your hole twice as wide as the pot, but just only as deep, because again, we don't want to bury that, that trunk or anything.
So they're gonna be in full sun. We wanted to get plants that are gonna be tolerating that full sun rather than not, because we want our plants to grow healthy and be in a nice, comfortable spot. All right, just give it a final soak. Hope you learned a lot from us today.
And we hope to see you at Chandler's WaterWise landscape classes, where you can learn so much more than we showed you today in order to have a fabulous landscape to last you for years to come.
Hope to see you there.
Hey, welcome back, Chandler. This is Vice Mayor Matt Orlando again. And now I have John Knutson, our Director of Public Works. John, welcome to the show. Appreciate it. Earlier, we were talking a little bit about the big picture, where the water comes from. And now what I want to focus on is what do we do with that water, okay? And how does it come basically from what you're doing to it, from the whether it's well or CAP or SRP water. What do you and your team do with it to get it to my tap, to our tap?
Well, our system is fairly complicated, actually. We serve about 280,000 residents, obviously, and the businesses, industries within Chandler. To do that, we have two surface water treatment plants. The first is our 60 million gallon per day Pecos water treatment plant. We also have a partnership with our neighbor, Town of Gilbert, on the Santan Vista water plant. And that's 24 million gallon per day share that we have of that plant. And then kind of the hidden jewel of Chandler is our a well field. We have approximately 32 wells distributed throughout the entire city that help to during peaking, and we save them for our drought. As Simone had mentioned, the idea that groundwater is a finite source, but it's there for reserve for our drought. And Chandler's managed to maintain our wells for that backup system for the future.
So, John, one of the things I get phone calls once in a while from you, obviously you and your staff get them, is, hey, I noticed the water's a little more salty or hard water, and I know you guys treat it and blend it or some other, I don't know, you've got some science stuff you do there. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think it's important for residents to know that, you know, we just didn't change the water overnight, and there's things we do.
Well, the system, since it is a fairly complicated system, we have many, many supplies. And on any given day, we could be bringing water in from, even the water that comes down the canal, the consolidated canal, could be water from different sources. So for instance, the consolidated canal is served from both the Salt River and the Verde River. And those two rivers do have different qualities. So depending on the mix that we receive coming down the canal, that can have potentially a taste effect. The other part of our system that is interesting is that we also have these 32 wells. And so in a particular region of the city, if we're happening to be pumping a well that day, that is another blend source that comes into the pipes that can also vary that taste, flavor. It offers a little bit different spice, I'll say, to the water.
Yeah.
And it's just the way we operate. And the system is a blended system. And so depending on the time of day and the day of the week and even the season, one thing that we do that is interesting in Chandler is the canal system, the consolidated canal that SRP operates, typically is taken offline between approximately Thanksgiving and just after the first of the year. So there's a month and a half time frame where that consolidated canal is literally, they call it dry up. It goes into dry up.
And that's for maintenance reasons or something
For
like
maintenance,
that?
for
Okay,
the
got it.
canal system.
Got it.
And when that happens, our Pecos surface water treatment plant is not able to operate. So that's why we have the well system. And so during that time frame, the well system picks up and we run the wells during that entire time to fill the pipes and to serve
I
the city.
see.
So during that time especially, you would see a potential change in that water quality because we're going from primarily surface water to a well water system at that time. And it's pretty seamless. We do it, we'll kick on the wells a couple of days before Thanksgiving, and we'll run them straight through till second, third week of January typically, and then we make a transition and kick back over to the surface water. And it's very rarely does anybody ever notice. We send out notifications to our industry that says we're making those changes in case they have treatment processes that they need to deal with.
Sure.
But we do that, and we've done that ever since the plant was built, all the way back in the late 80s.
So that brings us to the next question. So obviously that's safe to drink, obviously. You spend a lot of effort, resources, money, time frame in treating the water, chemicals, and I think there's a latest arsenic and some other stuff. Well, what are we doing there? How do we? I know you got a lot of scientists or chemists. I think chemists, the right word, that you have involved with this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we have a water regulatory division within our organization, and the team of chemists that we have that are housed at the water treatment plant really are our first line. First line of protection, first line, they're testing constantly. We have online monitoring at the surface water plant for all kinds of constituents. For instance, chlorine, turbidity in the water. We have online monitoring for those sorts of things. And our chemists are...
Chlorine, turbidity, I'm sorry.
Chlorine, we add chlorine as a disinfectant at the end of the process. And so we have online monitoring to make sure that's the correct level.
Got it.
Turbidity is what we call the cloudiness in the water.
Got
it. When we get water coming down that canal, depending on what's happening upstream of us, that turbidity or the cloudiness in the canal can become quite bad.
So actually, sometimes you do turn on a faucet. You may see a little cloudiness in there, or is that something different?
It's a little different. Typically, what leaves our plant, or not typically, but without any doubt, whatever leaves our plant is clean, non-turbid water.
Okay.
There's regulation to that effect, and so the turbidity that comes in the front of the plant for treatment, we use several processes during the water treatment process, beginning with what we call sedimentation, where all that turbidity is literally dropped out or settled out of the water stream. Then we go to filtration, where any final particulate matter is filtered out of the water. Then we go to disinfection. So that's really the way that a water treatment plant works. Sedimentation, filtration, and then disinfection.
Got it.
And all during that process, we have this online monitoring that is in effect. As well, we have our chemists taking samples throughout the plant, monitoring those to make sure that the water is safe and meets regulatory requirements.
So how do we do control checks? Is that the chemists do that, or is there other entities or independent entity does that?
Well, obviously we're doing, the chemists and our water quality group are doing testing throughout the city. We have about 80 sample points throughout the city, and these sample points are monitored twice a month. Those results are turned over to the state. We also have a myriad of other testing that's happening. We use our own labs, we use outside labs, and all of that information is reported. And that's really how we ensure that safety and the water quality for the residents.
So I know, just back up a little bit, going back on the safety and quality, I know the cost of chemicals has gone up dramatically, and I know, in all fairness, we had to raise rates last year and maybe again this year because of the infrastructure as well as some of that activity. So, that's all part of, I guess, in my case, doing business in our community. And we try to keep those rates low, obviously, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening that has to be accounted for in resources. So, leaks. I know that's a big issue with our city. And how many miles of piping system? You mentioned this the other day. I was shocked. I can't remember how many miles you said we had a piping system.
Well, of the drinking water system, about 1,200 miles.
1,200 miles.
Yes.
Of just drinking water.
Just drinking water pipes. 900 miles of sewer pipes.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of pipe.
So how do you keep track of that? You start leaking somewhere.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, you can imagine a leak doesn't stay unknown very long, because we run the system at a fairly high pressure. So if you've got a leak of any consequence, it usually comes to surface pretty quickly, and then we have teams of maintenance folks that go out and do a shutdown on that and then repair that main break. We are extremely fortunate due to some work that we've done on our system over the past 15, 20 years, that we really don't have that many main breaks. We have, I'll say, 2 or 3 a month in that range, maybe a few more, but compared to other cities of our size, we don't have that many, and so we're lucky that way. Some of the things that we do to mitigate main breaks is we have capital programs or construction programs for valve replacements.
Right.
And valve replacements are important because when you do have a main break, you want to be able to get the pipe shut down to mitigate damage. So that was one of the things that we started about 6 or 8 years ago, is a valve replacement program. First, we find the valves that are broken, we prioritize those, and then we go out and we replace those valves. The next program that we have is a main replacement program. So we're very busy constantly going out, and we've got many different neighborhoods in the city that have been flagged as a project to be coming soon. And those, the priority or prioritization of those is done by main break frequency, so we keep track of that. We keep track of the pipe age and the pipe materials, and so we prioritize our main replacement programs on those criteria. So we're working through the city, replacing the oldest pipe and the most vulnerable pipe on an annual basis, and it's a big job. 1,200 miles of pipe.
Yeah.
It's a big and expensive job, but it's something that we have to continually do to go into the older neighborhoods and make sure that they've got a good pipe for the future.
Yeah. And I know you talk about having cameras looking at, and then I know you explained to us one time at a council meeting, you were talking about actually encasing pipes, so you have to go there, redigging. There's a lot of technological things that we're doing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we try to keep up with the state of the art when it comes to the construction piece. A lot of sewer pipe, for instance, rather than replacing a sewer pipe by excavating the entire road, going down 20, 30 feet, we do processes called in situ pipe, where you actually install, I'll call it a sock for a better, inside of that, and then that is inflated, and it's a fiberglass material that is inflated, and it forms to the inner surface of the old pipe, and it creates a new pipe inside the old pipe.
Yeah.
And it's done without digging at all. And we use that periodically on our sewer, and we're always looking for those types of things to be able to restore our systems without disrupting the residents and the streets and that sort of thing.
Talking about pipes, wastewater. Talk a bit about that, because again, that's another process we don't think about.
Yeah.
When we turn that tap on, there's a lot of stuff happening in the background.
Well, the wastewater side of our business is something that Chandler should be very, very proud of. There's been an awful lot of thought and planning done over the past 30 years. And I have said this many times, Chandler uses every drop twice. And what I mean by that is once that water that we use from our tap, which we've talked about, goes down that drain, it's not forgotten about. It comes to one of 3 of our wastewater treatment plants. And at those treatment plants, we are able to treat that water to what is called an A+ quality. And that's the highest water quality that the state recognizes for reclaimed water. And that allows us to use that water for irrigation purposes and industrial cooling. And we also inject that water into the ground, into the aquifer, as Simone had mentioned, to replenish our aquifer. So we use the water in multiple different ways.
Right.
And that way, the really unique thing about it is when we use it for irrigation and for these other purposes, it actually offsets drinking water that we would have had to purchase or we would have had to find that resource for. So we're actually getting, a tremendously great boost by reusing our reclaimed water in the way that we do. And Chandler, I don't want to brag too much, but I think Chandler's
brag, brother.
about the only there are other cities that do it, but maybe not quite to the extent that we do. Most other cities have certain types of programs like this, but we have an entire distribution system in Chandler, in the south side of Chandler, to distribute that water for irrigation purposes. And it's been a very, very well thought out system for us, and it's working great for us.
So real quick, about a minute left, John. Talk a little bit about some of the future things we're looking at doing in Chandler.
Well, on the water side, we've got some really great projects at the water plant itself. We intend to design and build some new filters on the back end of our process. And then once those are complete, we're going to go back in and rehabilitate our existing 12 filters. Beyond that, we're going to be building some new unit processes within the plant that are going to help us remove some of the constituents that come down that canal, the total organic carbon, and that will help to enhance our water quality and help us to meet regulations into the future. So we've got some big projects coming in the next 4 or 5 years that are going to truly enhance and rehabilitate the water plant that is probably 25, 30 years old now. So it's in need of a little bit of work on those filters. So good stuff coming there.
So there's a website we could go to for residents if they want to learn more about our system here?
The Public Works Utilities website, we have information about all the different departments or cost centers that we have. And there's some phone numbers there that if anybody wants to learn about water quality or water conservation, they can certainly contact us.
Are we still doing the citizens taste test? We're doing away with that with somebody else.
I don't know that we're doing that formally now. I think we have a taste test every day.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm a tap water drinker, so I keep close watch.
Good for you. Thank you, John, for all the information you provided for us today. Up next, we're going to take you on a tour of one of those water treatment plants that we spoke to you earlier, of how it gets from the reservoir to your tap.
Chandler employees are hard at work every day, and for some, that work begins after dark. The operators at the Chandler water plant, like Ramon, start their night shifts by walking the grounds and checking each piece of equipment carefully.
As I'm doing my rounds, I'm listening for different things, and like different pieces of equipment make different sounds. So basically, your hearing is what you need to hear. If something's squeaking or something's making a different noise, you have to check that piece of equipment.
After 19 years, Ramon and other operators are making sure your city has clean water day and night.
All you're doing is ensuring that you got fresh water, you're filling tanks for the next day. And you don't have anybody calling you and say, hey, I need this, hey, I need that, hey, I need this. You're just doing your job. And a lot of people like to be on graveyard shift just because of that.
The city's water plant staff rotates between day and night shifts, which means Ramon has to make sure he sticks to his schedule.
I like it because I've been doing it so long, it's so easy now. For me, it's like second nature. I can hear something and I know what's wrong. Or I can basically almost foresee if something bad's gonna happen. But you gotta be very aware of your surroundings and don't be complacent. So if you're complacent, then things happen. If you're not, if you're on top of it all the time, everything runs very smooth like water.
Chandler residents rely on operators like Ramon and other night shift workers at the water treatment plant to make sure our city is up and running 24/7.
As you can see, Chandler really does care about the quality of water that comes to your tap. We're not only from a historical perspective and what we've done to make sure we have water available, to again, the future of what we could do to ensure that's a still quality water. I can assure you we're committed to keeping to that great philosophy we had in the past as well as to the future of ensuring we have a great water supply and that it's clean and safe that's come to your tap. I want to thank John and Simone today for all their expertise, and hopefully you learned a little bit about what we're doing in Chandler to make sure that water is quality and safe.